Danny.
Yes, thank you, convener. Actually, in terms of elected members, we've no substitutes or apologies today. As you say, apologies from our non-elected representatives, aside from Adrian, who is also kindly advised he has to shoot off at the 8-hour mark. So,
thank you, Danny. Any declarations of interest from members, please? None. So we'll move on to the minutes of previous meetings. I think you do have something to raise, Danny.
Yes, thanks, convener. A very small amendment to the minute you have before you, in that we have Councillor Stewart apologies are listed, which is correct, but missed off the fact that Councillor Cuthbert was substituted, so that'll be amended in the minute for this meeting.
Thank you, Danny. Any other comments or queries about the minutes, or can we agree them all as in 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3? Thank you very much. And I think you're also going to deal with outstanding business statement, Danny, please, as well.
Yes, thank you, convener. I think in terms of the outstanding business statement, isn't an awful lot of an update to give. I think a lot of, particularly pertaining to item 7 on the outstanding business statement, the appointment of non-elected members to the Learning and Families Committee. I think a lot of that is covered in item 5 on this on the agenda for this committee. So I'm happy to take really any questions or queries members might have on the outstanding business statement.
Thanks, Danny. Any questions or queries? All good. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll move on to paper 5, which is the appointment of non-council members of the Learning and Families Committee. The papers are all there. I'm not going to go into them in too much detail. A couple of points I would like to raise with it, though. I'm grateful for discussions with Councillor Shires as member of the opposition and the Provost. I think the appointment of the third religious rep panel will not automatically be the convener and the opposition spokesperson. It may well still be the convener of an opposition spokesperson, but actually, like we do with appeals panels and head teacher interviews, I think it's very appropriate that it's actually any 2 members from the committee, and we'll deal with that nearer the time if that's acceptable to everyone. The second point I would like to mention, and it's only really Adrian here, but I think non-elected members of this committee, whilst they have no voting rights, are still really important. I think we do want to hear in the future from religious reps, from youth reps, from teacher reps, from union reps. Their opinion is important and valid, and I think as we go forward into future committees, I think it's important that where members, non-elected members, do want to raise issues, that they should be done so. So, having said all that, are we happy to agree? Scott, do you want a comment to make, please?
Thanks, convener. Just to make a comment in relation to the report on the appointment of the third religious representative, given that the report proposes going out to advert, just I think straight after the meeting, and then with a view to bringing back a nomination to the next committee, I think it would be helpful if we could agree who the 2 names are that from the committee who are going to be having the discussions with the potential applicants, because if in terms of being able to bring that back to the committee next time, those meetings will have to take place prior to the next meeting. So if committee can give us a steer on the 2 elected members who would be taking part in those discussions along with ourselves, I think that would help in terms of the process.
Thanks, Scott. I think you're probably right. I don't think we're at that stage, though, however. So unless the broader committee want to nominate today, I'm quite happy that we don't. I think we can ask for the names nearer the time. I don't think it'll be an issue. I think we can agree them nearer the time. Councillor Shires.
I was just going to agree with your sentiment, convener, that presumably once we know the dates of proposed meetings, that will then dictate when people are available. So that might dictate who is willing to be on the. I'm sure all of us would be willing, but it might dictate when we're available.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Shires. Thank you, Scott. I do take your point, absolutely. I certainly don't mean it in any disrespectful, but I don't think we're at that stage at this point to a point with apologies, but thank you for raising that, Scott. Councillor Stewart, you have a question?
Thanks, Convener. I'm looking at the tables regarding proportionate representation from the different religions in section 4.3. And then the detail of the advert in the appendix. And I'm just wondering, does that 2-member panel then take into account, in terms of the letter of nomination for the third representative, the size of the religious group being represented and doing the nominating?
I don't know.
I'm happy to come in again, Convener, if just to clarify.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.
I think the legislation states that when making the appointment, the Education Authority should take account of the comparative strength of churches within the area. So that's why appreciating that the information that's there doesn't include the most recent census data, but this is the similar information that we provided previously. So it's a guide, I think, for the committee when they're looking at it to assist them in coming to a decision.
Thanks, Scott. That's very helpful. Danny, do you want to add something?
Yeah, just actually further to what Scott was saying there, Councillor Stewart. I think obviously the census data we've got is as stated in the report, is the most sort of current available. Now we've had a census since, but we've not had the results in. So yeah, ultimately it is a guide, more so than anything more than that. But yeah. Obviously, then it'd be for the members of the panel themselves to decide on the appropriateness.
Thanks, Danny. Okay, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Stewart, you okay with that? Thank you. So if there's no more questions or queries, I'm going to formally move paper 5. If I can ask Councillor Frampton just to second it, please.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Are we happy to agree paper 5? Thank you very much. We'll move on to paper 6, which is a review of the school estate. Which is a verbal update by our Executive Director. Thank you.
This is just a very brief note for committee to make members of this committee aware that the corporate asset strategy will be brought before full council in December, and as has been discussed previously at this committee, the corporate asset strategy encapsulates the investment blueprint and the property asset strategy, and any reference then to school estate developments will be part of that wider process. But there is a desire to ensure that all of the estate and the assets are considered as part of the corporate estate strategy, but we will obviously keep members of this committee fully involved and aware of any progress that we make in relation to that as per the decision of this committee beforehand. But it was really just for information to say that there is an intention to bring the corporate estate strategy to full council in December. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Sheena. I think that feels fairly straightforward. Any questions or queries on that? All good, thank you. Paper 7, which is the Education Reform in Scotland update, will also be introduced by our Executive Director, Sheena Devlin. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Members of this committee will no doubt be aware of the number and range of consultations that are currently taking place within the education system in Scotland at this time. This report simply provides committee with an overview of the education reform currently underway. It provides an update on progress with each and details how education officers, children and young people, parents and school staff are engaging with the proposals that are being set out. There are 3 main areas of reform detailed within the report which will have a significant impact on the future of education in Scotland. The first of those is the national discussion. The second is the review of curriculum, qualifications and assessment. And the third relates to the creation of 3 new national bodies. These areas of reform are phased to ensure that the views of stakeholders on the national discussion and then the review of curriculum, qualifications and assessment inform the creation of the 3 national bodies. The paper summarises the main areas of reform. It provides an update on progress to date and the planned next steps for each of these. Officers and staff across education and children's services have actively engaged in all of these areas of reform and will continue to support next steps appropriately. There are a number of officers here today who are happy to take any questions that members of the committee may have in relation to this paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheena. As always, in theory, we put the cues in the box. Given that I think just about all of the members, apart from maybe 2 are here, equally happy that you wave at me if that's more appropriate and easier. So, any questions on the report, Councillor Bailey Ahern, please?
Thank you very much. My question is based on paragraph 5.8 in the National Agency for Scottish Education. And it states in there about how it will become an executive agency of the Scottish Government and will encompass the current support and improvement functions of Education Scotland, SQA Accreditation, Regulation Directorate, the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework, and so it goes on. It then goes on to say it's important that it remains at arm's length from Scottish ministers and that the integrity of the role is secure. I just wonder how this is possible if becoming an executive agency of the Scottish Government, surely this is contradictory. And how will this new agency be scrutinised?
Thank you, Bailey Ahern. Who's able to? Thank you, Sheena.
I think in terms of the questions that you ask, Bailey Ahern, that would be a question for those that are overseeing the whole of review. It would not be for me at this point to share that information. I don't know the detail to be able to provide an answer to those specific questions. One, in terms of how that would any new agency would be scrutinised. I don't think discussions and developments have got to that stage of thinking yet. And in terms of the first part of your question, I think that would be a question for perhaps Scottish Government colleagues to respond to rather than myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. I think you raise a perfectly valid point. I was slightly floundering there because I also don't know the answer. I suspect there'll be a bit of water to go under the bridge, but I think you make a valid point, Bailey Ahern. So thank you. Councillor Shires, please.
Thank you, Convener. I've been really interested to follow the discussion on social media for the parent council networks across the country on the various, particularly the national discussion. And my question was about how we're engaging with parent councils and other parent carer bodies and pupils, and will the outcomes of those discussions be available for us to see in the future? And my second question was, will the council be making a formal submission to these various consultations?
Sharon, I think you might be able to pick up on some of that, please.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, we have engaged as widely as we possibly can with all of our stakeholders in relation to all of these consultations, Councillor Shires, and they have been, I suppose, nationally organised so that parents as individuals can kind of respond. We've worked with our schools to make sure that the information that's available to schools has been widely disseminated so that schools work with their own parent councils. And obviously, as we meet with our parent council chairs network twice a year, we keep them up to date with how that's going. Schools were invited to put in their own submissions, and we certainly actively encouraged schools to do that. We didn't ask for those responses to come in to us. We did put forward a response from ourselves as officers, and we could certainly make that available to you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Councillor Shires. You have a second question, Bailey Ahern, please.
I certainly do. Councillor Shires has got 2 as well, but I'm quite happy to bounce it back. My second question is on paragraph 4.2, which mentions the moving of the curriculum for excellence in the Scottish system. and it mentions how it's among the leading in the world. In 2006, the PISA researchers found the average attainment for 15-year-olds in Scotland was well above the international average in both numeracy and science, and the best in the UK. By 2018, the most recent PISA survey, Scotland was at best average internationally and probably behind England in all these measures. We've seen a decline in attainment, and the attainment gap between those of the better off families and those from the poorer ones having widened. Although we thank the officers in Perth and Kinross for all their efforts to try and tackle this situation, I wonder what is needed to be done to address this situation, and is a curriculum review going to address the problem?
Thank you, Bailey Hearn. I think I might answer that one if that's okay. I think you've been selective with your PISA quotations there. There's plenty of other PISA reports that has us actually pretty good in comparison. I think in most measures, Scottish education comes out favourably. Not them all, of course. You're quite right to point that out. But yeah, I think that's an ongoing debate where we are. But yeah, like I say, I think there's a little bit of favourable selection there in your quotes. But point taken, nonetheless. I think you've got a follow up in your second question, Councillor Shires.
Thank you. I wasn't quick enough off the mark previously. So my second question was a formal submission going to be made on behalf of the council to the various different consultations? I mean, some of them are like hugely, well, they're all hugely important, but some of them got very, far-reaching consequences for Perth and Kinross young people. And I would have thought normally when we make a submission to a national consultation, it comes to council for either to committee or to council for agreement. So it was to find out more about that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Just before I move on, I should also say, Bailey Hearn, that just for the record, I'm delighted that Scottish Government will rejoin a lot of these things. I think it is important that we're up front about where we stand. So in defence of your point, I'm happy that we've gone back into a lot of these studies. Sharon, I don't know if you can add anything further. Have you added everything you can to Councillor Shires' point about consultation?
We have provided a council, an education authority response, Councillor Shires. I'm not aware that we've been asked to deliver a council consultation, so I would need to check up on that.
Thank you, Sharon. Councillor Kigali, you have a question, please.
Yeah, so in 5.4.3, when it's talking about phase 3 of the consultation, there's reference there to vocational qualifications. And I've engaged a fair amount with a few bits of a few organisations that are dealing with vocational stuff at the moment and the apprenticeship levy, and there's lots of frustrations at the moment that they feel like there is still people coming out of school that are maybe not approaching it because they're getting encouraged to just go to university and stuck in a bit of a quagmire there. And whilst I appreciate this is an ongoing process, it would be helpful just to hear what council's doing at the moment to make sure that in the education space we're ensuring that people feel comfortable and empowered to go for vocational qualifications, and that they are viewed with as much bright light as purely academic ones.
Thanks, Councillor Kigali. I think you're absolutely right with the tenor of your question. Vocational education, vocational qualifications are really important to many people, and I can't remember the phrase, but about equity of worth is definitely relevant. Sheena, I think you're going to say something.
Councillor Kigali, there's a position that's long been taken within Education and Children's Services in Perth and Kinross that is about supporting the parity of esteem between that which is considered to be more academic and traditional qualifications and those that are vocational. In fact, vocational is possibly a bit of a misnomer, because if you want to be a teacher, which I would consider to be a vocation, then you need particular hires, which would be considered academic qualifications to pursue that vocation, and likewise medicine. So I think there's a bit of a false divide there, but we're certainly of the view that in terms of academic, vocational, foundation apprenticeships, modern apprenticeships, any kind of technical qualifications as well, that there's a parity of esteem around all of these, and that we've seen quite a significant shift actually in terms of the encouragement into a range of different non-academic courses, to use that phrase, across all of our schools. And we have considerable strengths in a number of our secondary schools in terms of their approach to numbers of foundation apprenticeships and that kind of thing. So I would want to reassure you and this committee that we don't consider there to be a sort of hierarchy in relation to that it's about ensuring young people have the opportunity to pursue that which is the right course for them, based on their needs, their skills, and that which they will have success in. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheena. I have written parity of esteem down as well, so I might remember that the next time. Provost, do you have a question, please?
So Stuart's ahead of me in the queue for a question.
Apologies, Councillor Stewart. Go for it.
Thanks, Convener. It was just to follow up on Councillor Shire's question about the formal consultation process. I think Mrs. Johnson said that a response had been submitted by officers as the Education Authority. I thought that it was councillors, the council through its committee, that was the Education Authority. And I just wondered whether the submission that was made specified that it was on behalf of the professional staff within Education Department rather than as Education Authority. And indeed, second part, whether there was an invitation for consultation from members of this committee.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Sheena.
Councillor Stewart, if there's a response submitted by officers in a professional capacity, then we would always ensure that that is made very clear. And in fact, that was the response that was provided. It was a professional response to a series of professional questions that had come. If it is the desire of this committee to make a response to any of those, then we'd be quite happy to respond to that request to arrange that and do that. Absolutely.
Thanks, Sheena. Again, it's a good point, and I think there will be a lot of water to go under the bridge, and I've used that phrase before, and it may well be appropriate that this committee has some kind of formal response to that. So thank you. Provost, please.
Thanks. Sorry, Convener, you're going to get bored of this theme, but I'm on the same theme. The council is the Education Authority, and as Councillor Shires indicated, this is a very important response, and I would have expected the response Councillor Shire indicated either to this committee for draft for consideration before submission, or indeed to full council. Now I can confirm it is not on the agenda for full council next week, and it's obviously not on today's agenda. So I think it would be appropriate for the response to be brought to the committee for consideration. It's fine if officers wish to submit individual responses as professional officers, but the Education Authority is the council, and this committee is the delegated body within the council for education matters and should be agreeing consultation responses, I would think.
Thanks, Provost. Sheena, please.
If I could just say again, Provost, if that's helpful, and apologies if Sharon's response has confused matters. The response that was made was a professional one as professionals of officers who work in Perth and Kinross Council. There has been no formal response submitted on behalf of this committee, and if that is the wish of this committee to do that, then through the convener, that's obviously something that we would do. So just to reassure you that we have provided the responses as professional officers and no more than that.
Provost.
Thanks. I appreciate that you have responded as professional officers. I think my concern is that it might have been submitted as the council as opposed to as the officers, i.e. if it goes on the public website, the Government Consultation Hub website as Perth and Kinross Council, there's a reasonable expectations of parents and members of the public that we as councillors, as the Education Authority, have agreed that response. So just ideally a bit of clarity on what it actually has been submitted as.
We've submitted a response as professional officers who obviously work in Perth and Kinross Council, but it's not been submitted as a response from Perth and Kinross Council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Provost, and noted. If there are no more questions, I will formally move the report. I genuinely think these are really exciting times for Scottish education, actually, and there's lots I could say in moving the report. I'm not going to, because there will also be plenty more discussion. There'll be plenty of debate. Noted what members have asked for in terms of more involvement with this committee. I think that's perfectly valid. We'll seek to do that. And there will be plenty of water to go under the bridge before any of this is decided. So at this point, I'm just going to formally move the paper, and I'm going to ask Councillor Carr to second it, please.
I second the paper.
Thank you. I'll now invite comments, and the first one's from Councillor Leishman.
Thanks very much, Convener, and thank you to Executive Director Devlin for the report. We know that pre-pandemic that most parents expressed confidence in the education and learning provided, and the value of schools and staff when parents trying to navigate homeschooling during lockdowns were obvious. I personally can testament to that. As I've said before, the pandemic highlighted failings and widened many of the inequalities that blight our society, and education certainly wasn't immune. But post-pandemic, we do have a great opportunity here. By undertaking education reform, we've got the chance to build an education system that works for pupils, students, staff, local communities and wider Scottish society. And if we get this right, then the positive effects can really be transformative. But I do have some reservations about how we're going about this reform. Firstly, the Education Reform Inspectorate and Agency Delivery Board is chaired by the Interim Chief Executive of Education Scotland, and ES has 5 other representatives on that board. Half the members of the board concerned with policy and legislation work for the Scottish Government, and the Qualifications Board has 6 members who work at the SQA. Now, I understand that there are obvious reasons for having representation from outgoing agencies on these boards, but essentially we are asking organisations to provide answers to a problem that they are recognised as being a major part of. For example, the Muir Review recommended taking accreditation and regulation out of the SQA. So basically what I'm saying is reform must not be merely a superficial process. The selection of pupils for different schools was ended in Scotland in 1965, but selection within schools has still occurred since. This categorisation or streaming of ability disproportionately impacts children from more deprived areas. And I'm happy to read that there is a significant reduction in external assessment, including exams, and there is going to be an integration of academic and vocational qualifications and a broader evidence base of achievements that include skills and other competencies. The exam system has always been weighted towards more advantaged schools and children, with one of the inequalities shown up in the pandemic being home learning, and children living in deprivation being impacted by trying to learn in a home environment that has its difficulties. Another pandemic bias being the algorithm-based system adopted by the SQA. Education reform should still adopt the positives from the Curriculum for Excellence, and educational policy making should be built on trust placed in teachers. Speaking with teachers, they want greater autonomy and a more collaborative approach of working, and the Scottish Government, local authorities and teaching unions really should work together on this. For a long time, the EIS has said that teachers want to be empowered by having greater consultation on curriculum matters, amongst other things. So I realise that reform won't be a speedy process, but I do hope it is a transformative one with some fresh and bold ideas. Time will tell. Thanks again, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman, much appreciated. I've got Councillor Shaz for a comment, but Provost, you wish to put an amendment in with your permission. Councillor Shaz will hear that first.
Thanks, Convener, and I hope maybe you'll just incorporate this in, but I think it is important that the committee and the council submit an official response as the Education Authority, and would propose that as an amendment to the paper.
Thank you, Provost. Can you just clarify what you mean, please, Provost, just for my benefit?
I'm proposing that the council submit an official response that is consulted with elected members of this committee as the Education Committee, and that is agreed by this committee or the executive subcommittee or full council.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Sheena.
May I just clarify, Provost, which consultation it is that you're seeking the formal response to? Because I'm aware that some consultations will have closed. That's why I'm asking. Thank you.
Well, ideally, we would be submitting them to all of them, but if there is ones that have closed, we could ask for a late submission to be accepted. I think that these are important matters, and ideally, we would be able to schedule them in as a matter of urgency, and I can confirm as Provost I'll happily accept it as a late item on next week's agenda.
Okay, thanks, Provost. I'm inclined to agree in principle. I'm slightly worried about practicalities, so we might just have 5 minutes recess if that's appropriate, just to make sure we're not doing anything that we shouldn't be doing. Inclined to agree in principle. Thanks. Thanks very much for everybody's patience. Are we live again, Audrey? Thanks very much for everybody's patience there. Provost, thank you for your amendment. I think for the benefit of the committee, what the principle of it is that as a committee, as a body of education, as the education authority is the phrase I'm looking for, we will input into phase 3 of the Hayward review, and we'll have something for our executive sub that will be discussed and approved. And if you're happy with that, Provost, and everybody else in the committee is happy with that, we'll incorporate that into the paper.
Thank you very much, Convener.
Thank you very much. With that amendment, can we agree paper 7? Thanks very much. We'll move on to. Thanks, Chris. We'll move on to paper 8, which is the virtual campus secondary education, and that will also be introduced by Sheena Devlin. Thank you.
This report provides committee with a short update on the current curricular choices available to young people via various virtual arrangements. It also sets out how the virtual campus offer developed within Perth and Kinross is progressing, with a further 5 areas being planned for session 24-25. These will be agreed through collaboration with young people and staff to ensure that the areas incorporated will be delivered in this way meet the needs and aspirations of the schools and the young people themselves. The appendix of the report provides members with a summary of the virtual campus offer within Perth and Kinross, along with the key features as it is currently constructed. It also sets out our aims for future developments. There are officers online and in the chamber who are happy to take questions, Convener, in relation to this paper. Thank you.
Thanks again, Sheena. And the first question will come from Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much. This is probably too early to ask in the since virtual campuses have been around, but I just wondered what the exam success rate was of pupils having taken part in virtual campus courses, and are the results comparable to classroom-based courses?
I'll ask David McCluskey or Paul Cunningham to come in with a bit more detail about that. But before I do, Bailey Ahern, I think the question you've raised for me really sits at the heart of this, that we need to have some kind of longitudinal understanding of how successful or otherwise this kind of learning is, because it will not be an appropriate forum for all young people in our schools to be undertaking qualifications. And so that longitudinal look and that continuous look at any variations in results as by method of delivery will be really important. So I don't know is the short answer I have in terms of what we might be already seeing, but Paul or David will be able to answer that question as to whether we've got anything at this point or not.
Thanks, Sheena. Paul.
Thank you. Just to say that would have been a follow-on. I was using the exam pass as a point to work back from, but yeah, exactly my point.
Paul, please.
Yeah, so from last year, we've got 14 PKC young people were presented, and the qualifications that they gained were 5 A's, 5 B's, 2 D's and 2 withdrew. So it was a 71% pass rate, which is in line with our other subjects of young people sitting that same subject in person.
Thank you, Paul.
Can I ask if we know why 2 withdrew? Was it because it was virtual, or was it for another reason?
It was because they had their entries for university and decided to pursue another route.
So actually, if you were being the devil's advocate, you could actually argue the pass rate was higher than 71%. No, I'm told no. So we'll move on to a question from Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener. I welcome the move in the virtual campuses to share the benefits of the virtual campus among those going for National Progression Awards rather than advanced hires. I just wondered if you could give us, well, first of all, is this direction agreed with the TRICS the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative. And also if you could give us examples of the sort of subjects that would be covered by the National Progression Awards, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you might be able to answer some of that again, Paul, are you, please?
I think I picked up what you asked. I might not have, but the type of MPAs that are being offered or investigated. Yeah, so we're exploring things in creative industries as one of the NPAs, for example. We're also looking at some of the DYW live courses that are available, the Developing Young Workforce Live. So courses around skills for learning, life and work and employability.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Kigali, you have a question, please.
Yes, almost on the same theme as Bailey Ahern's question, and how the success is going to be assessed, and whether as uptake grows over time, there's any concern that we might lose some of the skills that one develops from being in-person social skills potentially, and whether I'm just being overly cautious with that, or whether that's something that's being considered, and as this grows, might in the future become potentially an issue.
Thanks, Councillor Kigali. Sheila, please.
A really important point, Councillor Kigali. There was a report published, I'm trying to remember when, maybe a year, 2 years ago, by the group who work very closely with Scottish Government, the professional advisors who work very closely, international advisors, I was scrabbling around for their terminology, the international advisors. And in that report, there was clear evidence post the first phase of the pandemic about the absolute necessity for in-person learning, because education is as much a learning construct as it is a social construct, and I think that's really important. And therefore, the use of virtual as a means for learning has got to be done very, very carefully, and it's not appropriate as a learning vehicle for all young people. And so that there's quite clear assessments that we undertake to establish whether in fact young people, this is the best way for them to learn, because you're absolutely right. Learning is more than just about learning the stuff and knowledge and information, but it's about learning how to be with others, interact with others in a range of different ways as well. And so a lot of that can be done in person. And the whole sense of virtual can sometimes also be a bit of a misnomer in that there's no in-person support or learning, and that might not be the case depending on particular courses. So it is absolutely about the right blend of that which is done at a distance and online, and that which would be then that kind of in-person support. And the other thing to say is it's not a replica for the kind of studying that young people might do, whether at college or indeed at university. There's age and stage and maturity differences as well that we need to take into account. And so that development of the young person in the round is really important, and it's really critical that we continue to support that in all ways. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Sharon, I think you were going to add something there.
I was convener, but I think the Executive Director has covered that fully. And just to reassure you, Councillor Kigali, that we are looking at and monitoring the uptake of all the offers that we're making in terms of virtual campus, and we're doing that in conjunction with our Tayside colleagues. So we're looking at uptake, we're looking at pass rates, we are looking at widening the offer once we've got some good evidence that young people can make the best use of the virtual offer with no detriment to their success. And we're doing that also at the end where we're supporting young people who are doing National 3 qualifications, and that's a different approach to the virtual campus that we're offering at Advanced Higher. So although we're providing information and support to staff through a virtual offer, the staff themselves would work with those young people in smaller groups. So it's different kinds of offers, and we're collecting as we go evidence of success to make sure that we do not have any detriment to our young people in terms of their success.
Thanks, Sharon. I think there's a second question from Bailey Ahern, but I'm going to come to Councillor Welsh, please, for his first question.
Thank you, convener. Apologies for the delay there. Just to clarify, well, here's a question, but to clarify something first in terms of virtual, this is immediately out with, if you like, the school estate. Thank you for clarifying that, because my son took part in a virtual campus. My question is, have we actually got any feedback or from those young people that actually took part in these form of study to get their response?
Yeah, no, that's a perfectly valid question as well. I don't know if you know the answer to that one, Paul, please.
Yes, we do have feedback that we gathered at the end of the first year of the virtual campus, and some of the comments from some of the young people are in the appendix, but we do have some more information in terms of enjoyability, accessibility and challenge and things like that.
Thank you, Paul. Bailey Hearn, please.
Thank you. In the report, we see that 14 young people took part in 21-22 and 32 in 22-23. And the question is, was that the extent of the request, or was there some other factor that limited the numbers we could take part? And do we have sufficient resources, especially for those that want to take part from home and not necessarily in a virtual classroom environment in the school that the report says?
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, that was the extent of the request. So all young people who wish to proceed and pursue that level, that type of study, were able and accommodated with. And there was a mix of young people being able to experience that learning either in school in a designated provision or at home as well. So we ensured that they had the right software and equipment that they needed.
I suppose a follow-on from that is we've seen a demand increase over the 2 years there. I would imagine there'll be another increase moving forward. Do we have the resources in place to sustain that increase in numbers?
Well, I think partly the answer to that question was why our administration put the extra money to it, which was very gratefully approved by the budget committees. But I think that at least partly answers the question. Sharon, please.
Thank you. Yeah, Bailey Ahern, we have had additional resources to support this. We also use all of the resources to provide a virtual campus offer that have been available for quite some time nationally. So we use eSchool and Scholar, and we work with our Tayside collaborative colleagues to do the same. So what we're offering in Perth and Kinross is really very tailor-made to what our young people are they're going to need. The additional funding that we got from the from Perth and Kinross Council for this year is looking at exactly what the wishes might be for us moving forward into the August 24 curriculum diet, and we're going to spend some time looking with our young people and our staff in schools how we can broaden the reach of the offer. But we have already invested in a virtual region in every secondary school. So there is somebody already within every secondary school who is looking very carefully at the virtual campus offer and what the needs and aspirations might be of young people going forward.
Thank you, Bailey Hearn. Thank you, Sharon. Councillor Stewart, you'll have the last question on this one, please.
Thanks, convener. I think it's two questions. First of all, what's the mechanism for deciding which report gets put into the virtual campus? And presumably there's, I mean, we were talking about demand there, but you know, just how widespread does the demand have to be in order for a subject to tip over into qualifying for virtual campus?
Paul, sorry, we're making you work hard today.
That's all right. So there is a working group that's made up of representatives from across the TRIC in terms of Dundee, Angus and Perth, in terms of what the needs are within each school and what needs can be met or what courses might not be able to run because of the low uptake in a particular school. That information is put together and pulled together through discussion with the school timetablers to determine the need. And then we put the information out to schools, identify appropriate staff, and then ask young people to apply and complete the application process for each of the subjects. So that's the process at the moment for determining.
Thanks again, Paul. Do you have a follow-up second question, Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, I find it surprising, I think, that there's only 3 subjects where there's a gap in across the entirety of Perth and Kinross Council in the provision in our secondary schools. But my next question kind of is on a related subject. I think from reading the report that we offer 3 subjects through the virtual campus, which is 2 hires in politics and business administration or administration and IT, and 1 in advanced hire in physical education. There's also reference to national 3 level qualifications across 8 subject areas, but that seems to be different because those are resources available for courses to be delivered to young people by teachers without in-depth subject knowledge. So my recollection is from the earlier years of the virtual campus that we had up to 5 subjects, and I would have expected that to expand at exam level at higher and advanced higher. So have we actually, over the course of the period, reduced the number of exam offerings available to our young people?
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I think Sharon was nodding her head knowledgeably at one point, so I don't know whether you want to let Paul have a wee break on this one.
Yeah, I'll let Paul answer the question about whether we've expanded the offer. I was nodding knowledgeably about the National 3. I'm happy to take on that question.
So we started in with 3 advanced hires, which have since doubled to 6 advanced hires. We're piloting 2 hires this year. So the offer is increasing, and then the National 3, which Sharon will pick up, is an online offer. The difference being that there's not the same element of live learning, if you like, but there's an online offer in which young people access pre-recorded lessons, assessment materials. The key difference, I suppose, between the two, to be quite blunt, is that within the advanced and higher offering, there is live lessons online, whereas at National 3, they watch some recorded lessons, and then the live support comes in the form of a person, a teacher in school.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Stewart.
I think I heard 6 there, but the report definitely says in more than one place, higher politics, higher administration, and advanced higher physical education. So that's only 3.
Sorry, bespoke to PKC is the 3. The additional ones are via the trick, which PKC staff support and deliver as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks.
So just to go back to my original question, the virtual campus offer was originally wider, I think, and or certainly has not grown from what it did originally, which I would have expected it to do with the injection of the extra funds that you were talking about, Convener.
Sheila, please.
Councillor Stewart, the additional funds are scheduled to increase the offer in session 24-25. So the funding that was made available in the budget earlier this year is designed for 24-25, because we're currently working right now on the offer for August 23-24. And the additional £61,000 that came in March will support a further expansion, but from 24-25. At this stage, we don't know yet, because as Paul Cunningham explained, or perhaps it was Sharon, I can't remember, there's still work to be done in terms of understanding from young people and staff what that will look like, and whether that will be, if you like, chemistry, geography, or another national progression award, or some kind of leadership qualification. So the detail of what that additional number will be, we don't know yet at this stage, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I'm going to move the paper at this point, and in doing so, I do think that offering the broadest subject choice possible is very important, and I am delighted although it's only the start of it, that Council agreed extra funding for it in March. I think Councillor Kigali is right, though. It must be seen as a complement to what we do every day in the classroom and absolutely not as a substitute. But nonetheless, it is the direction of travel, and I'm happy to formally move the report and ask Councillor Frampton to formally second it, please.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Frampton. I'll invite comments now, please. If there's no comments, can we formally agree the report? Thank you very much. We're an hour in, so we will try and get through it, I think, in the nicest possible way. I'm now going to pass on to Councillor Frampton to deal with paper 9.
Thanks, Convener, and then I'll ask Sheena if she could speak to the next paper.
Thank you, Vice Convener. This is a report about a very sensitive subject matter. This report has been written to provide an overview and an up-to-date summary of activity in the area of mental health and suicide prevention, with a focus on the work that has been underway in schools. This work has increased in need and reach since the pandemic, and the report has been written to give an understanding both of achievements but also areas of challenge. It highlights the particular work of the ECS Suicide Prevention Coordinator, Steve Sweeney, who's here with us today, who has been working closely with the Educational Psychology team to enhance systems and processes to protect our most vulnerable children and young people. This report provides committee with a comprehensive summary of the existing work and the current focus of activity since the pandemic, summarising outcomes and ongoing actions. Susie Turner, who's our Principal Educational Psychologist, and Steve Sweeney, the Suicide Prevention Coordinator, along with Sharon Johnson and myself, will be able to pick up on any questions that are appropriate for us to answer at committee today. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you, Sheena. Is there any questions? Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've got 3 questions, but I'm quite happy to let other people take part as well. How do we engage and work with and monitor the mental health of young people that have limited engagement with the education system?
Thank you. This is an area that requires quite a bit of attention and sensitivity. It's about how we as staff respond and look out for the young people that are in front of us in our classrooms and in our communities. It's about a partnership approach. So we have included in the appendix report some of our community mental health work, and it's about increasing the confidence and the competencies of staff. And it's also about very much about working with parents and making sure that they understand how to support the mental health of children and young people, along, of course, with listening to children and young people who are able to talk to us and engage and to come forward.
Bailey Ahern, one of the practical examples that we can give in terms of that engagement would be the phone line that we operate and that operated during the periods of lockdown and has continued to operate in some form as well, where there was a number that was made available for children, young people and indeed families to contact members of the educational psychology team for exactly those kind of discussions that would be happening, and some of that would be around for some young people for whom, you know, regular attendance at school might not have been something that was routine. And so the work that Susie has just outlined there involves some of those very specific kind of activities.
Thanks, Sheena. If you don't mind, Bailey Ahern, I'll go to Caroline next. Councillor Shears, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question might be a kind of obvious one, I'm not sure. It's to clarify that this survey was being carried out in addition to the health and wellbeing census, and to ask about how the results, will they be kind of cross-pollinated is not the correct expression, but you know what I mean, considered alongside each other to see if, because it would in some ways perhaps verify the information in, you know, in the health and wellbeing census. So I'm quite interested to know how we'll consider those results.
Sheena.
Your specific question about them being different surveys, they absolutely were different surveys, and you're quite right, Councillor Shires, in that all the data that we have, we would and are taking into account in terms of helping us then plan and prioritise future support and areas for our attention. And next week there is a session for elected members that will look at some of the issues in a bit more detail that came through in the health and wellbeing census, but I think you'll find in terms of the discussion and the discourse at that session that then mention will be made of the other sources of information that we have from children, young people and their families that we are paying attention to as well.
Thanks, Sheena. Bailey Ahern, we'll go back to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my second question is, this survey was done a year ago and the statistics in the papers were the result of that a year ago. When you look at in the press this morning and other areas, those numbers have doubled. And if so, why have they doubled in such a short space of time? The next paper we're going to be going on to the issues around COVID, and you could expect numbers to increase because of the COVID, but we're a year away from that now, and the numbers are still increasing. And I just wonder if there's any indication as to why that is.
Sheena.
Bailey Ahern, you've probably heard me before in this committee and in perhaps council talk about the fact that from our perspective, we don't see that COVID is done, if you like, that actually from the four harms of COVID, the immediate harms to health, if you like, have in some way reduced and been mitigated with the range of activity that was undertaken around vaccination and all the rest of it. But in terms of social and emotional harms that COVID has had, we still see that is very much live and something that we see day and daily in classrooms and across families and just through the work that we do. So there's certainly a view amongst us as a series of professionals who work with children, young people and families that the pandemic is far from over. And I think today's headlines, as you alluded to, and certainly the local press would support that. Quite why numbers have doubled, I couldn't say exactly why it is numbers have doubled in that period of time, but what we have seen is that if you like, that legacy of periods of lockdown, disruption to family routine, to family relationships, that is something that's a bit longer term, and we certainly see the impact of that manifest itself in a range of different ways, not least if we think about children and young people who perhaps did not have the normal or opportunity for things like playgroups, early years provision, where that socialisation and that coming together with other young people was manifest, and we are seeing differences there. So we do see that this is a long-term endeavour to recover in an educational and in a children and family sense from the pandemic. So we still talk about seeing the impact of that writ large. I would say, you ask about the fact that was a year ago, and we've got information that has come through different partners who are working with children and young people in terms of the numbers that they are seeing, and we think that's going to continue for some time to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. And your final question.
Thank you. Yeah, self-harm was only mentioned a couple of times in the report, and this is sometimes a precursor to accidental or intentional suicide. What work has been done to help identify those that do self-harm, bearing in mind that most of those that do tend to do it in secret and over a long period of time?
Thank you. You are right that we need to consider self-harm as part of the one possible precursor to suicide, although in itself it doesn't always necessarily mean that. We have been working in a fully partnership way with school nurses, with public health and with CAMHS over the last couple of years to look at some of the issues for school staff. We've consulted with school staff in 2 of our secondary schools and with young people in each of those schools to look exactly at what some of the issues are. Some of the issues coming forward are about use of language, about confidence of staff. And so we are in the process of developing materials. These will be and are being jointly delivered between educational psychology and the Lighthouse. And we've been aligning this work very closely with the work that Steve Sweeney is leading in terms of suicide prevention, so that there is a coherent message for staff and for children and young people in our schools.
Thank you. My second question is, as it says in the report, partnership working is crucial, and we all know that the most fundamental partnership is with the family of young people, whether it's parents, carers, or the wider community that are around them. And I just wanted to find out what work's being done to work with parents and raise awareness and the vital signs that they need to look out for and point signpost them to support that's available.
Steve.
Hi, hi. Thanks for that. Yeah, this is a big area to tackle. The approach that we're taking currently is one of the whole school approach, so that includes the community. And I think certainly the approach that I'm using is, where do we start with this work? I think we're talking about a culture that needs to change, which can take a long time. Our starting point was to find out what were the baseline data that we're dealing with, and to support staff and schools initially to be confident to deal with these issues. Since I've come into post, part of my role is to make myself available as a consultant to staff who notice that children are struggling. And as part of that role, I will include myself in terms of supporting the family to know the right things to do. We should probably think about moving to include parent councils in being involved in the whole area of suicide prevention, because you're quite right, it does take a community to move this forward. I've found that there's a great willingness in the community to engage with this matter, although I do expect that for some people that might be quite dangerous in terms of opening this idea that if we talk about suicide, it'll make things worse. So I'm just really aware of that. I can't think of anything else really to say about that, other than that it's an area that really needs close attention and good planning. So that's something that is on my agenda to take forward for the following year. Thank you.
Okay, Susie.
Can also give some practical examples, Councillor Shires, of work with families. For the past 2 years, this second academic session, the Community Link Worker team has been working with some primary sevens, doing a joint piece of work with pupils and with their parents around managing anxiety. We've got a pilot within the educational psychology team, also working within All Through School, looking at how at the point of transition we support parents to think forward about some of the issues that might arise in terms of teenage mental ill health. And we've also been supporting the work of CAMHS, who are running a decider skills programme. That's available for practitioners. They will come forward over the next session for 2 school communities, but is rolling across Tayside at the moment and is available in Perth and Kinross for parents on a 4-weekly programme, looking specifically at how to support mental health in children and young people using cognitive behaviour therapy principles. So these are areas that we continue to monitor closely to look at what's working and what else we can do.
Thank you, Susie. Councillor Welsh.
My question is, are the technology companies and social media platforms contributing to the significant rise in mental health issues, and how are we supporting our young people to cope with this, because it's a direction of travel I can see only becoming more and more difficult as we go forward?
Sheena.
Thank you very much, Councillor Welsh. I don't think I would want to be definitive about the role of the social media companies in terms of impact that they may have on children and young people. That would be for children and young people to tell us that they feel that that's the case. And sorry, I'm talking to you through this screen. So if what I'll do is I'll move my microphone so I can see you as I'm talking to you rather than talk to you through that screen. But what we are aware is that children and young people do tell us about, how they feel around the impact of, for example, social media on their health and well-being. And that's something that we've been acutely aware of in terms of listening to them and thinking about that. And so for a number of years, actually, Perth and Kinross has led the way in terms of trying to help children and young people, and indeed, importantly, their parents and guardians, stay safe online. And so we were one of the first, if not the first, local authority in Scotland that started what has become an annual, and we've now done, I think, 10, 11, maybe 12 of our, keeping safe online events. And they're not just a one-off thing. They are a coming together where we share about the latest technology and means to be keeping yourself safe online, guidance for parents as to how to do that as well. So that is ongoing work. We also have young people trained as supporters in this very specific area in schools, and they can provide peer support to young people, and often that's more influential than adult to young person support, listening to peers and taking advice from them. So that's a piece of work that has been underway for a long time across schools in Perth and Kinross, but the reality is we can never really say we're that terribly far ahead of any of the developments, because those developments in terms of technology happen at great pace. But we do try and maintain a sharp focus on exactly that. And it's not just about the young people, but it is about all who engage with young people in terms of helping them help young people keep safe online as well. But you will see from the article that Bailey Ahern referenced that certainly social media is cited as a cause for concern for young people. And so therefore that is definitely something that we do pick up on and deal with, whether that's through personal and social education or other parts of the curriculum at schools. Thank you.
Thank you. That's encouraging to hear.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Vice Convener. We've heard about the work that goes on at that transition phase from into secondary school, and we've heard about a lot about the work with CAMS, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. What about the onward transition out of the category of people that this report refers to, because obviously that would create in itself a point of vulnerability for people affected.
Steve, could you come in on that, please?
Rome wasn't built in a day, I think, with this work. We're starting at a very kind of base point with all of this work, and to get round to transitions into adult services, is that what you're referring to? Yeah. So very aware that there are problems in that area, but we have started communicating with our health colleagues in terms of what can be done to improve services here. We've got a mental health delivery group that we've established here, which is a full complement of multi-agency partners, and that is one thing that we're looking at. But it's very early stages. I can't, tell you any more than that. I'm sorry.
Councillor Stewart, I can give you a practical example of where that kind of discussion has commenced. And in fact, I'm thinking back to June, there was a meeting in this very chamber that was bringing together a range of different people from council services, from health, to talk about exactly this kind of issue. So we have Steve Sweeney, who's here today, who is the child suicide prevention officer, and there is an equivalent of Steve in terms of adult services. I think Steve's been probably a bit modest in terms of the work that he's been engaged in to date with adult services, but as he says, it is probably at an early stage in development, but it would be fair to say that we are have already begun that work, because you're absolutely right that each point of transition there can perhaps then be a vulnerability for particular individuals, and ensuring that that ongoing support is there for them is absolutely critical. So Steve is in very close contact with his counterpart in adult services, and I do think perhaps his modesty is preventing him from sharing with you that the work is at an advanced stage, which it's not, but it's at a developing stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheena. I'm not seeing any. I am now. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Vice Convener. At 2.22, at the national programmes, it says that 1,072 Perth and Kinross children and young people have access one-to-one counselling. Do you have any statistics that you can share with us about what they're wanting one-to-one counselling for, male, female? What is there any way we can have these sort of statistics?
Yes, in general terms, we know that the predominant issues are about anxiety, they're about family-based issues and some peer social interaction and relationships. We know that counselling in schools is accessed more by children and young women who are female, and we know that it's less accessed by those from more deprived areas. So we have been looking at piloting some group work with the specific aim of increasing accessibility. There is more information around counselling in schools that can be provided.
Councillor Massey, we'll happily share any statistics that are able to be shared with you in relation to that question, and we'll provide that for all of the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions, so I'm going to go on to move the report. Suicide prevention and mental health work. There has never been a more important time to do all we can to work together to protect and promote the mental health of children and young people. I am pleased to present a summary of the ECS work in this area and note both of the sector leading outcomes, along with areas requiring ongoing focus and coordination. The Learning and Families Committee is asked to note the summary and actions and request that the Executive Director bring back an update report on the current actions. And I'll ask Convener to second.
Thanks very much, Vice Convener Frampton. In second, and I just want to very briefly thank Susie and Steve for their attendance today, but actually more importantly for the ongoing work. And I know Rome's not built in a day, but I think I hope I speak on behalf of the whole committee that really appreciate the work that you've done so far, and best wishes for future construction, as it were. Thank you, and happy to formally second. Thanks, Vice.
Thank you. We'll move on to comments, and Billy Ahern, you have a comment?
Thank you very much, Vice Convener, and I really welcome this paper. And as the Executive Director said at the beginning, it's a sensitive subject. And as some of you will know, mental health and suicide prevention are topics close to my heart. As well as having an understanding in mental health, although limited, I've also taken suicide prevention training, not just for personal reasons, but also to improve my understanding, as well as how to help those that I meet who are at a point of despair and have run out of options. This paper deals with the problems that we have with suicide in young people and the importance that's placed in trying to engage with the young people that have these thoughts and tendencies, and rightly so. Mental health, bullying, exams and course pressures, as well as family issues, are just part of the reasons that our young people look to self-harm and use suicide as a solution and a way out of a problem. Anxiety, which was just mentioned, is too often overlooked and is not taken seriously as other mental health conditions. However, it can often be the driver to a downward spiral of depression and eventually suicidal thoughts. We can have all the strategies and protocols you like in place, but talking about it, and that has been done through the Ambassador Programme, is a massive step forward and essential. It should not be a topic that people are afraid to talk about. We, and I mean society, need to take mental health and especially suicide in our young people seriously. I often ask myself, why is it that life is so different now compared to when I was growing up? Maybe it isn't. Maybe people didn't talk about it, or might more likely didn't want to talk about it back then. Society has become more open and acceptable about what is different, but has that gone too far? I think a big reason, not just for our young people, but for a lot of society, is the emergence of the internet, which we already discussed earlier. And that has become and will continue to be a big part of the problem. Too many negative comments and too much abuse is carried out online, and more often this is behind closed doors, attacking individuals' appearance and beliefs. So if we really want to make a big difference, the appointment of the Suicide Prevention and Mental Health Coordinator is a huge step forward, as well as all the other work that's been detailed in this report. But as mentioned earlier, we need to address social attitudes through the use of social media and all forms of abuse online, because until we do so, these measures detailed will just be a sticky plaster. We must also remember that the young of today will be the driving force and adults of the future, and we need to ensure that they are empowered and knowledgeable to carry out that role, and that's more than just going to school to be educated. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. It was very helpful to have a briefing on this at the Children, Young People and Families Partnership a few months ago, and I welcome Steve and Susie's work and the coordinated approach that's being taken to this in education and children's services in schools with young people themselves and with partner agencies to tackle the issues of suicide prevention and mental health. I'd like to just thank all the officers involved for their work and commitment to this, and for the support and reassurance that I know they're giving to families and to school staff at very worrying times. And it's also great to be giving the young people tools to help one another. I'd just like to thank you very much for all you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Leishman.
Thanks for the opportunity of commenting on this, Vice Convener. I freely admit that before I was elected, I was ignorant to a lot of what the Council does. And reading this report is one of these examples of learning about the vital work Council does in and for our communities. It's just over 20 years since I was at secondary, and looking back in my school days, there was nothing like this support available for children and young people that were really struggling with their mental health or, in extreme circumstances, having suicidal thoughts. We also didn't have mobile phones or social media, and the pressures that they bring can be toxic, oppressive and overwhelming, as Councillor Welsh touched on with his question and Bailey Ahern quite rightly in his comment. Thankfully, education and to some extent society has made progress in understanding and providing services for the mental health and well-being of children and young people. And thank you to Susie Turner for the report, and both Susie and Steve Sweeney for answering questions. They've certainly given us a lot to think about as we leave the committee today. And when the papers were issued, I went away and did some research, and to be honest, it was an exceptionally tough read. Suicide is the leading cause of death among children and young people in Scotland from 2011 to 2020. Public Health Scotland found that more than a quarter of deaths of those aged 5 to 24 were as a result of probable suicide. And the report from Public Health Scotland took figures from the Scottish Suicide Information Database, and it said there were 820 young people resident in Scotland that died by suicide between 2011 and 2020. Incredible, that's an average of 7 a month. Professional analysis of these figures and learning more about the circumstances and characteristics of suicide deaths is crucial in developing more effective preventative action. In 2020, the rate of probable suicide amongst those living in the most affluent areas was 5.1 per 100,000, compared to 12.4 for those in the most deprived of areas. And when we look at this, since 2010, people have suffered from a battery of problems. An economic recession, sustained spending cuts to spending, welfare and benefits, social isolation from a global pandemic with 2 periods of lockdown, overall low paid employment leading to not covering the basics, never mind having disposable income, and a cost of living crisis meaning people are too frightened to put their heating on. As always, this devastation has been most acutely felt in already disadvantaged communities. So I don't think it's a shock that the poorest people in society are twice as likely to take their own life as more affluent people. And based on pre-pandemic data, Perth and Kinross has 5,155 children living in poverty. And we all know that realistically today's total is going to be a lot more than that. I'm glad that the Community Health Fund is funding a suicide prevention and mental health coordinator post. As the report said, partnership working will be critical, and I wish the coordinator well in the role. What politicians in local government, Holyrood and Westminster need to do is to support workers in the front line that are putting their heart and soul into preventing suicide. Because with the life circumstances so many residents in our communities currently face, I fear that more people will be so desperate that they think taking their own life is the only way to escape the problems. We have to do absolutely everything possible to make sure that people realise that that is not the solution. Thanks again, Vice Convener.
Sorry. I'll now pass over to Vice Convener Councillor Carr for item 10 on the agenda.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'll invite the Executive Director, Sheena Devlin, to introduce the report on the impact of COVID-19 on services for children, young people and families.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. Suffice to say that the social and emotional impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted heavily on some of our most vulnerable children and young people, and we've heard a bit about that already this afternoon. Extremely high risk-taking behaviours have meant that many of these young people could not have been placed safely within a kinship or a foster care placement, and residential care had been the only option. This has resulted in significant financial pressures being experienced within services for children, young people and families, which has also been compounded further by a number of staffing challenges as outlined in the paper before committee this afternoon. On 1st of March 2023, within the budget setting process, Council approved the request for additional financial support to manage the impact, or rather to help manage the impact of COVID on the most vulnerable children and families, and to help reduce the need for residential care placements. This report provides the context for those financial pressures, the staffing pressures, and outlines how funds will be utilised throughout this forthcoming year to help mitigate the situation that we are currently facing. Hazel Robertson and other officers are here, Vice Convener, who will be able and happy to answer questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Can I invite any questions on the report? We have a question from Caroline, Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I've got a couple of questions. Will I just ask one and then come back here? Okay. So my first question, trying to work out how to add these together so they become one big long question, is where is the residential care that we use provided? Is it out with Perth and Kinross? How far away is it?
Yes, in the main, all of the residential establishments we use are out with Perth and Kinross, so that largely means travelling for visits to see the children, for them to see their family. Most are in Scotland. We have at present one in the south of England, but because it's a very specialist nature.
Thank you, Hazel. I'll now invite Councillor Barrett with a question.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'd just like to ask, how confident are we that the additional funding that's described in 5.2 will be sufficient to continue to provide the support that's needed in 23-24? And what's going to happen after March 2024 when most of this comes to an end?
Hazel.
Thank you. Certainly the pressure on our residential budget was extreme during the last year for many of the reasons we've actually just been speaking about with the previous paper. That will be covered by the funding that has been allocated, and there is an expectation that over this year that 1.15 million will be covered for that. We have put in place a number of mitigations to try and offset the demand. As was said in the introduction, you know, the pressure on the residential placements has been compounded by staffing issues within the service too, some of which, you know, people are covering for staffing absences and vacancies, which is a national issue. You know, certainly speaking to colleagues across Scotland, there is a national recruitment crisis for social workers. People are not finding that particularly attractive as a profession, and therefore to attract people to come into these jobs is quite complex. With that in mind, we're looking at, you know, how can we manage the services we currently provide? Can we look at earlier intervention? We know preventive and restorative mechanisms that we can put in place are effective. It will take time. You know, certainly we are monitoring it incredibly closely. We're looking at every vacancy, how we can cover every vacancy. But, you know, we will continue to do that, and we will continue to report on the actions that we're taking. I mean, the funding for the additional staff will end in 24, so that is what we're working to in terms of how can we ensure the provision of the services we need into up until the end of 24. So 24-25, we would hope to be in a better position with our residential budget, with many of the young people having moved to independence or be supported to return home. And I suppose the million-dollar question is, how can we prevent more young people requiring that level of support?
Thank you, Hazel. I think probably a lot of us are aware of the difficulties of recruiting into care. It's a problem that isn't going to be answered anytime soon. So it's a welcome addition. Question from Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. It's really just a further clarification. On page 69, 4.1, it says, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a notable increase in the numbers of young people demonstrating extremely high levels of risk-taking behaviours, emotional harm, drug and alcohol use, and expressions of suicidal ideation. I just wanted to ask, what are actually the figures regarding the notable increase compared with the figures pre-COVID? And is there a sort of a breakdown in figures between the high level risk factors identified, or is it that each young person exhibits more than one of the risk-taking behaviours? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Hazel, can you take that?
Yes, thank you. The figures equate to approximately a third more. So when we look in 2020, in the lead up to COVID and before the impact really hit home, we had an average of about 13 or 14 young people who required that level of residential care, and we provided 24/7 support within the community. Since then, so in 22-23, throughout 22, that rose to 21, where it's has remained fairly stubbornly for the time for that time onwards. So an increase of a third of young people who are in residential care. In respect of the second part of your question around risk-taking behaviours, there are multiple factors for these children and young people. It is rarely a single cause for any reason for them to be accommodated. Almost all will have experienced trauma. Many are using drugs and alcohol to mask pain that they're experiencing. Some have been exposed to sexual or criminal exploitation. There's self-harm issues, sometimes leading to death by misadventure, or the fear of death by misadventure. So we, of course, would want to be avoiding that. And of course, you know, suicidal ideation that we've just heard a paper about. So, I mean, I think these are some of the factors that can make it very unsafe to remain within the community, in any sort of setting within the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question from, in fact, no, firstly, we'll go back to Caroline Shires for a further question.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My other question was asked by Councillor Barrett, but I was trying to get a sort of picture of where we sit nationally on this. Is this something that we're experiencing more acutely than urban areas? Is there a rurality issue connected to it? And is there work being done to look at, the sort of national picture?
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Can you come in on that, Sheena?
Councillor Shires, you're absolutely right in your assumption that this is not just something that is particular to Perth and Kinross. This is something that is being acutely experienced across all of Scotland. And I know that myself, through my contacts in the Association Directors of Education Scotland, ADES, and Hazel through her contacts in Social Work Scotland, it's a subject that we respectively are regularly discussing with our counterparts who are all experiencing similar pressures, and that's regardless of whether urban, rural or combination of both in terms of geographies and local authority areas in Scotland is something that is being experienced quite widely. So similar levels being experienced and financial pressures also being experienced. Thank you.
Yes, if you'd like to follow up on that.
There's a supplementary on that, and our representation has been made to the government about this, because clearly, this is kind of fallout from COVID. We had set down a path with the REACH project, etc., to address things that we were experiencing here. We had a strategic plan in how to manage that. We put financial resource into managing it. Then, wham, along comes a global pandemic, and that throws us off course. So we hear reports about massive eye-watering government underspends, and it would strike me that there would be I wouldn't expect you to comment on the political aspect of that, Sheena, but it would strike me this is exactly the type of fallout from COVID that we would be expecting ministers to step up and help us. Councillor Barrett asked the question about, we're putting in place funding, but only so far. And the whole point of what we were trying to achieve with what we were doing with redesign of service was looking longer term, and the resource to get everybody back on, not on track, but back into a position where we can once again cope with the level of support we need to put in place would be really helpful. So going back to my question was about the discussion with the government about this, because I think they really do need to step up and give us support.
Yes, Sheena.
I'll comment where it's appropriate for me to comment, Councillor Shires, if that's okay. If I can just draw committee's attention back to the Chief Social Work Officer report that was considered at Council relatively recently, and in that, Jackie Pepper raised the issue that during the course of the pandemic, additional funding came into local authorities in relation to adult services, but not in relation to children's services, and thus a request for support through the council was made, and we're very grateful that was approved. I can assure you that there is proactive discussion with colleagues across different services in government, and in fact I sit on a national children's services group that is chaired by Scottish Government of which there are health colleagues, local authority colleagues, education colleagues, Social Work Scotland colleagues on, and that is something that is under active discussion and consideration just now by that National Children's Services Leadership Group as to what ongoing and different support there might need to be for this sector across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Final question from Councillor Leishman.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Yes, it was just to ask what evidence is there of children and young people in Perth and Kinross having a co-occurrence of risk behaviours, so undertaking multiple risk behaviours as opposed to just the one?
If you could come in on that, please, Hazel.
I suppose there is the number of children that are reported through the Children's Hearing System that will have a number of risk factors noted. These are recorded within the individual notes and rather than collectively. So, I mean, there isn't a collective of how many children have had multiple risk factors, but almost inevitably that is the case for all of the children that we are considering either foster care or residential care for. You know, I honestly cannot think of any child where there has been a single factor in existence.
Thank you, Hazel. With no further questions, I'd like to thank Executive Director Sheena Devlin for her answers, and especially to Hazel for her very detailed and knowledgeable answers to the questions. Much appreciated. So if there are no further questions, I'll move the report. COVID has affected everyone, but the social and psychological impact of COVID continues to be felt by our young people and their families. A substantial number of young people continue to demonstrate worrying behaviours, including suicidal ideas. In some cases, the risks are so high that residential care placements are the only option. Increasing the ability to increase these placements is critical in tackling these problems. It must be noted that these additional places create huge pressures on council budgets. So the additional 2 million agreed in the March budget to support young people at risk is a very important addition to our resources as we face the challenges ahead. Can I ask the convener to second this report?
Thanks very much, Vice Convener Carr. Just very briefly again and seconding it, I think the very valid points about funding going forward are entirely appropriate. Not a direct answer to the question, but I know the focus from this top table for as long as we're here will be on support and additional support need. Absolutely, it's a difficult road to travel, but it's one we're determined to do so. But also secondly, just to, as we often do here, just to thank Hazel and her team who continually support our young people and continually to produce resilient, engaging, achieving, confident and healthy young people. Sorry, I couldn't resist showing off a little bit there, but absolutely delighted to second the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I'll now invite comments to the report and we'll start with Councillor Leishman.
Thanks very much, Vice Convener, and I'll echo you in thanking Hazel Robertson and Executive Director Devlin for the report and for answering the questions as well. For children and young people who've experienced life in chaotic or desperate situations, feelings that the pandemic brought, like loneliness, fear and social isolation, are no strangers. Already complex circumstances must have been made even more problematic because of the pandemic. No or little face-to-face contact for children and parents, restrictions on travel, underlying health issues, and not having access to technology all made keeping in contact hard. Screen usage, boredom and increased inactivity because of the confinement measures in place would have been more likely and led to an increase in psychological distress and mental health symptoms. And adolescence and young adulthood are significant times in addressing health and social inequalities. A school age is when there is a better chance of improving their life through education and acquiring skills that would help gain employment. It's incredibly worrying that risky behaviour in adolescence persists into adulthood. Going beyond the damage it does to initial brain functionality and decision making when growing up, it leads to an increase in morbidity and mortality, and health risk behaviour in adolescence is linked to deprivation and socio-economic inequality in further adulthood. Over a decade of austerity, then a pandemic, and then the subsequent response to that has led to these severe socio-economic inequalities. And with these inequalities being fundamental barriers to people's human rights and chance of progression. But I would like to finish on a positive note. Huge praise should go to the people who looked after and helped the children and young people adjust to these restrictions during the pandemic. What a role they played and continue to do so in such difficult times. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman, and a very good point regarding the people involved with helping these young people. I'll now move to Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Keeping it brief, thank officers for bringing this paper, but echo the concerns that I made during the questions about the long-term risk to the council's finances of this situation, and really would appeal to yourself, Convener, to make representation to the government to echo the pleas being made by Sheena's colleagues at ADES about the scale of it, and thinking of Hazel and all of her staff. We are so well served by really dedicated staff across this council, and the REACH project, which sought to bring them all together to sort of wrap services around young people at the point that they needed it the most, is the kind of approach that we desperately want to see rolled out for as many young people as possible. So I would hope that you would take my comments in the spirit of which they're intended, Convener, because I really do share the concerns that Councillor Barrett made about, where we get to when this funding comes to an end, and how, with our budgets being as they are, just a little bit of that government underspend would go a very long way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shires, and absolutely agree with the sentiments that you've relayed in your comment there. Very well put. Comment from Convener Rivik.
Yes, thank you, Vice Convener. Just in response, I think we do take them in the spirit they're intended. It's a fair point, and certainly something we'll be happy to do. I think supporting additional support needs and adverse childhood experience, for that matter, not always the sexiest requests for funding. They don't hit the papers like shiny new schools and repairing potholes do, but they're even more important. So it is taken in the spirit it's intended, and we'll certainly do that. Before I say any too much more and get myself into trouble from somebody, I'll just thank you, Vice Convener, for the opportunity to reply. Thank you.
Thank you. With no other comments, can we agree the report? Thank you. I'll pass back to the convener.
Thanks very much, Vice Convener Carr. Thank you, everybody, as always, for their attendance today. I think, as always, we've had challenging questions, but appropriately challenging, and I thank you for that and the spirit in which we all engaged here today. As always, I want to thank our senior officers, but in particular Paul, Susie and Steve, for their very helpful answers to some of the questions. So thanks very much to that. And we're kind of on the cusp of that 2 hours, so thanks everybody for their patience. And yeah, thank you.